Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Jayne, Senior Policy Counsel here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. This week we're introducing a new member to the FFRF team who will be helping us protect the separation between religion and government from the Christian nationalist battleground state of Oklahoma. Joining me for the introduction is Dudley, our State Policy Manager.
Hey, it's good to be here, Ryan.
Good to have you here. So let's introduce FFRF's newest staff member, who is the first sitting state legislator to join our team, Oklahoma State Representative Mickey Dollens, who is now our first Regional Governmental Affairs Manager. Welcome aboard, Representative Dollens, or should we just call you Mickey?
Yeah, you can call me Mickey. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great.
Good to see you, Mickey. And as always, we want to hear your thoughts on the topics that we discussed today. Please leave your questions in the chat below or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions during the live show.
So Mickey, can you start by just introducing yourself a little bit and letting listeners know where did this opportunity come about and what made you want to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Yeah, of course. My name is Mickey Dollens. I'm an Oklahoma state legislator, fifth generation Oklahoman. I earned a football scholarship to Southern Methodist University right out of high school, graduated with a degree in English, tried out for the NFL and got into the United States bobsledding team and had the opportunity to represent Team USA all around the world. Came back to Oklahoma, started working as a roughneck on the drilling rigs. Whenever Oklahoma went through a bust in our oil industry, I became an English teacher. And then due to poor fiscal policy from the state-controlled GOP, our education system and core services went into a $1.5 billion revenue failure. And I, along with over 800 teachers in Oklahoma, were laid off in 2016. And that's when I decided to run for office. And since being in the Oklahoma State Legislature since 2016, I've been fighting for the constitutional principle of that separation between church and state to ensure that everyone can have religious liberty. And I actually ran into you all about it last summer, summer 2024, at a conference. And I just wanted to say thank you to you all for helping us fight this legal battle where Oklahoma established the nation's very first publicly funded religious charter school and won in the state Supreme Court. And we got to talking a little bit, and then Dudley invited me to speak at the Freedom from Religion Foundation's national conference in Denver, which was very well attended, incredible speakers. I was on a panel with two legislators from Colorado, and it went really well. And after the panel, we got to talking about ways that we could continue to collaborate and work together in the future. And just so happened it worked out to where now I can help collaborate with lawmakers around the country and help them with talking points and debate prep to push back against this theocratic approach that we're seeing in not just Oklahoma, but in states all around the country that undermines people's religious liberties. So very happy to be here. We definitely have our work cut out for us, and I look forward to talking about that more today.
Yeah, I remember running into you at that conference and getting a chance to chat with you, and that was a pretty cool experience, I think. And now we're super excited to have you on board. Can you tell us some of the things that you've done as a state representative in Oklahoma that kind of falls in line with what we do here at FFRF?
Absolutely. I mentioned defending that separation of church and state. If you've seen any type of theocratic legislation that's rooted in Christian nationalism around the United States, be assured that it either originated or it's been heard in Oklahoma. You have organizations like Turning Point USA, the Heritage Foundation, people who've orchestrated Project 2025. They use Oklahoma as a testing ground for their policies that then either branch out into Texas or Florida or vice versa. So I've pretty much seen it all from release time to public school chaplains. As I mentioned, the nation's very first religiously funded charter school. And I've had the experience to push back and find the talking points at work, and also to collaborate with faith leaders in Oklahoma who defend that separation of church and state, who give religious lawmakers the cover they need to understand that Christian nationalism isn't religion. It's a political ideology that's rooted in power, fear, and control, and probably above all else, money. They find out ways to siphon off public funds into religious organizations and take away people's taxpayer dollars and kids' opportunities, especially in public schools. And so I've had extensive experience pushing back, debating against bills rooted in Christian nationalism. But on a different topic, a similar approach to what we're doing with coalition building, getting messaging out. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to run a bill that addresses missing and murdered Indigenous people in Oklahoma. We have the highest rate of missing and murdered Indigenous people of any state in the country. And one of my constituents reached out to me and said that her cousin, Ida Beard, went missing in Cheyenne Arapaho tribe land about 5 years ago. This would have been about 8 years ago now. And she wanted help in creating legislation that would help families that are experiencing the same turmoil and crisis that her family went through. And so we got together and we went around the state and we had meetings with activists who have been on this issue for years and years. And we listened more than anything. I listened, and I took all of their considerations and did an interim study. And together with the lead of the indigenous tribes in Oklahoma, we created legislation that established a liaison within the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation to help families navigate the jurisdictional boundaries through law enforcement in tribal lands, in county, city, state, and federal government to ensure that that process goes smoother. Because in the case of my constituent, her cousin went missing in Indian territory, in Indian country, and the DA in that county said, well, I don't have any jurisdiction over this. You got to go to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. And there they were able to really get the attention they needed. And so with this liaison, we've seen great strides in getting resolutions quicker. And this legislation has been modeled in several states around the country, and it's helping people navigate those jurisdictional boundaries. But I say all of that because a lot of the same things we did with that bill is what we're trying to do here with helping people, taking notes of what people are saying in their states, helping lawmakers craft debate talking points and pushing back something. And it's not going to happen overnight. This is a marathon. The Christian nationalists have been implementing laws for the past 50 years that seem pretty innocuous. And over time, they've built, and now they just feel safe enough to be able to be more outspoken. And over the next 4 years, we're going to see a big threat to democracy, and even continuing to see power-hungry politicians trying to implement their narrow interpretation of religion onto all of society. And that's a direct affront not only on religious liberties, but on parents' rights as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I think a lot of what you're describing shows why it is that you're so effective and why we're so excited to have you on board at FFRF. I mean, you're describing how what you're doing is largely what we all want our lawmakers to do, which is you actually care about your constituents, you care about solving problems, and you're perfectly willing to work with whoever's willing to work with you, right, to get these problems solved. It's not like the typical political battles that we see when we watch national news where it's just the Republicans against the Democrats and no one wants to work with each other. Everyone's frustrated with that. And I know we were very impressed when we got to know you about how genuine you are and how you described your very interesting history. And so it makes sense that you're coming from this unique perspective where, like you said, you're there because you saw a problem, you kind of said someone ought to do something about this, and then once you got in that position, started talking to your constituents, you saw all these problems that needed attention. So I think it's really inspiring, especially in a place like Oklahoma, because I think a lot of folks who are in Wisconsin or elsewhere in the country might write off Oklahoma as the kind of place where it's like, well, this is a difficult place to get good change done, so it's probably a lost cause in a lot of ways. And so I think it's really great to see someone who has the kind of success stories that you've already had there.
Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit about what are some of the unique threats to church-state separation happening in Oklahoma? You mentioned some of them, but What do you think is the best way to go about combating them? When you have people like Ryan Walters, people who watch the show will be very familiar with who Ryan Walters is, but with all the different issues of Christian nationalism encroaching into your state, what do you think is the best way to go about combating that?
You know, Ryan, what's unique about Oklahoma and Texas is that it all originates here. Heritage Foundation, Turning Point, USA, Americans for Prosperity, Project 2025, it's being implemented in Texas and Oklahoma. And we're the first ones to see it, and we also have to be the first ones to address it. You mentioned that a lot of people just write off Oklahoma, they write off Texas, but especially Oklahoma. You know, we're arguably the reddest state in the nation, having voted every single county red in the last, 3 presidential elections. But it's important that resources be spent in Oklahoma and amongst other organizations as well, not just Freedom from Religion Foundation, but anyone who is interested in protecting democracy and religious liberties. One effective way of combating Christian nationalism, I mentioned education, calling it what it is, getting information out, but also collaborating with local faith leaders in our community who can talk to their congregations and tell them that this isn't, Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It's political ideology that's rooted in power, fear, and control. One lawmaker in Texas who's done a really great job of this, who's also a pastor, is Representative James Tallarico. He's a great example of how he uses his pulpit to talk about the teachings of Jesus from his perspective as a lawmaker on what he wants to accomplish. For example, feeding the hungry, sheltering the poor, healing the sick. Those are the type of messages that he gets out to his congregation and to his constituents that seem to resonate really well. There's another group here in Oklahoma called the Oklahoma Faith Network that's led by Dr. Reverend Shannon Fleck, who's done a really great job of getting information out. There's Christians Against Christian Nationalism, which is a national organization. But to be able to build those coalitions, much like we did, or I did here in Oklahoma with colleagues when it came to addressing missing and murdered Indigenous people, building those coalitions to fight back against Christian nationalism is going to be pivotal. It's going to be crucial. And then also informing people as it comes along. And to look at something like, okay, so there's a bill that wants to mandate or allow for religious chaplains to be in public schools. A lot of people would look at that and be like, okay, big deal. Until you call out that there was no background checks required. There was no standards required. Like in the military, we have chaplains, but there's high standards that one has to be able to accomplish to become a military chaplain. Oh yeah, and also that Oklahoma is severely lacking in trained mental health professionals and has been lacking in the funding to retain those mental health professionals, counselors in our schools. And we need more than just church and nonprofit to fulfill core governmental services. Once you start to talk about that need, then it becomes, oh, I see, they're just asking volunteers and church chaplains to fulfill the role of trained mental health professionals. And they're also using as a way to inevitably proselytize to students, because it begs the question, as a chaplain, how capable are they to not proselytize, because that's their profession as a chaplain, especially when there's no standards, there's no background check. And once we brought these issues up in the legislature, got it in the news, got the media's attention, then all of a sudden the amendments were added to require background checks, to require some type of standards. And while that bill was still signed into Oklahoma, it was much better than it could have been. And so those are the type of wins that we're looking for. And a lot of this stuff is going to be really hard to defeat, especially in states like Oklahoma, but we can improve them. We can make it better. And that's the type of wins we're looking for. And we have also a host of issues that we're looking at as well, but that's just one example.
Yeah, I love the way you're framing Christian nationalism, just to kind of to wrap up what you're saying a little bit, or to reframe it. I love the way you're framing it as a political ideology and not much else than that. I love that. That's spot on, I think. Mm-hmm. But So kind of shifting gears to like your work here at FFRF, what are some of your intentions or goals with your work here?
Well, it's been a great time working with you all. We've narrowed down some specific issues that we're looking at. In particular, we're looking at these anti-blasphemy laws. These are very outdated laws that are on the books in 6 states. And it's, for example, people who aren't religious cannot hold religious office. People who aren't religious can't hold political office. And while some people would look at that and be like, yeah, but that's never going to be enforced, it's important to take states like Idaho, for example, who've just introduced recommendations to the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse marriage equality. These type of archaic laws will make a comeback, and it's important that we address them now and get them off the books before some Christian nationalist lawmaker looks at it and says, well, here it is, here's a precedent, here's a statute, we can enforce that now. That's really important to address. There are some states that don't have released time or school credit for released time, and for people listening who aren't sure what that is. In states like Oklahoma, students can get out of PE, music, art, and take a bus to a church across the street or down the road, engage in a right-wing theological course, and then come back to school and get credit for it. The main actor behind that is a group called LifeWise, and they were very aggressive in Oklahoma, and they were able to pass their law. And, that's less curriculum time that students are getting in the arts, in physical education, in music. And so we want to protect states that don't have that law currently. We're also looking at secular recovery programs. There's a lot of judges out there who never ask people who are going through mandated recovery programs if they have any issues with religious recovery programs such as AA or Alcoholics Anonymous. There are plenty of programs out there that are non-religious that can be used to fulfill mandated recovery requirements, and we want to make sure that people are aware of those options. We've also been looking at child negligence exemptions for faith healing. That's going to be a really tough one, but unfortunately, there are many kids who end up very sick or, in some cases, even passing away because of faith healing. And we think that there should be some more accountability in that. Public schools is probably the number one issue. Of course, right now we've got issues with wanting to display the 10 Commandments in the state capitol, which seems to come up. It's one of those zombie bills, even though the people of Oklahoma in 2016 voted overwhelmingly by 57% that they didn't want their tax dollars to fulfill religious purposes and or religious displays like the 10 Commandments, but stuff like that keeps coming up. Also, we have a state superintendent, Ryan Walters, who has continued to lose lawsuits and cost taxpayer dollars, millions of dollars in taxpayer money in his frivolous lawsuits, trying to pass unconstitutional bills such as Bible mandates in classrooms and 10 Commandment posters. And so we'll be helping lawmakers push back against those type of bills as well.
Yeah, and you had an op-ed published recently that describes some of these efforts that you've done to fight back against Ryan Walters' efforts and how you're going to keep working on all of these issues. And I have to say, Mickey, you just covered a huge plethora of different issues very masterfully. And I have to emphasize to our viewers that you've only been here for a week. So it's kind of incredible. I mean, it shows that you really have been a strong ally on all these different issues for some time. You really understand what is going on, and it's been great to work with you in this short time we've been working together, in that you are just so clearly on the same page that we are here at FFRF. So it's that is all just awesome to hear. I think a question a lot of people probably have, you're talking about state level advocacy, and they say, well, wait a minute, you're a state lawmaker. So how is it that you plan on balancing your duties with us with your duties as a state representative in Oklahoma?
It's a great question. I've been asked that a couple of times. I've been in the legislature now going on 9 years, and for the majority of that time, I've always had a full-time job outside of the legislature. And it just comes down to time management, time blocking, finding time to do your job, because I've got 2 kids to provide for. And so you make time. And when it comes to an issue like this, I'm obviously very passionate about it. And so it's nothing for me to stay up late to read articles, to research, to debate prep. This is something it's really passionate to me. So when I'm researching, when I'm reading bills, when I'm reading the latest headlines or writing an op-ed in this case, it's not like work to me. It's more about protecting the future, especially for my 2 kids. One of my daughters in pre-K, my son's in first grade. And, with these religious mandates in our public schools, this is an affront. This is an attack on parents' rights. I've heard from conservatives all last summer when I was knocking doors. I was knocking Republican doors for my colleagues, helping them get reelected. And they said, I'm a Christian, but I don't want government teaching my kids about religion. That's my job. That's my church's job. Can we keep the Bibles? Can we keep the religion out of classrooms, out of public schools? And it's something that not only I heard, but my colleagues in the House Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus have heard. People want to keep that separation of church and state. And that was evidenced in 2016 when the people of Oklahoma voted down that state question to use public dollars to fund religious purposes and activities. And so I know, what we're doing is pro-Constitution, it's pro-parents' rights, it's patriotic. And I'm happy to be with the America's largest free thought organization, helping fight that fight across the United States.
Absolutely. And I love that you are, helping to reclaim some of these terms, because for so long, the extreme right has had a grip on things like family values. And then recently they're passing bills that are all about parents' bill of rights and fighting for parental rights. It's such nonsense if you know what's actually going on. So I think it's past time that we reclaim these terms, and love to see that. So to our viewers, if you want to learn more about Mickey's background and the work he's done to promote the separation of religion and government in Oklahoma, you can watch his appearance on our broadcast TV show, Free Thought Matters, which is also available on our YouTube page. And Mickey, I know one thing that you discuss on the show, maybe you can tease it just a little bit, is the book that you wrote. So another topic that hasn't even come up yet that you are an expert on is kind of standing up for direct democracy. And your book is really it's a great guide. I mean, it's called The Citizen's Guide, and it really is like a practical guidebook to how citizens can use direct democracy to get the change that they want, even if their elected officials are not doing it. It's so useful, and you have some really interesting case studies in this book. Do you want to maybe share one or share any story from the book really quickly, just to kind of tease our audience?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wrote and published that book last summer, and I've gotten great feedback from it. Oklahoma is one of 26 states with the power of the ballot initiative. This allows ordinary people to influence and change public policy. But the problem is a lot of people don't know where to begin. This book in the beginning teaches you how to take an idea to the ballot box. And then the second half are common legislative attacks on that process of petitioning the government. For example, increasing the passing threshold, requiring geographical minimum requirements for signature gathering. Background checks on signature gatherers, which makes no difference in their ability to collect signatures. But I've got about 10 of the most common attacks, and I continue to add to it. So there will be a version 2 soon. And one of the case studies that really stood out to me, one of my favorite parts about writing this book was getting to interview these people from across the United States who have affected change. We've got Katie Fahey up in Michigan, who made a Facebook post saying, I don't think politicians should choose their voters. Voters should choose their politicians. And she was successful in organizing and passing a independent redistricting committee in Michigan. I talked to Desmond Meade in Florida, who was a former convicted felon. When he was a young kid, he made some stupid mistakes. He did years in the Florida penitentiary. While he was there, he found the prison library and he studied up on law. And when he got out of the Florida penitentiary, he served his time, he got out, he put that knowledge to use. He took the LSAT, he got into law school, he passed the bar, he became a prominent attorney. However, he couldn't vote because he had a prior felony conviction. And so he used his knowledge as a lawyer and his natural skills for organizing. And he successfully collected enough signatures with a whole bunch of other people to make it to where the people of Florida could vote on to reinstate the voting rights of people who had prior felony convictions. And he was successful. And as a result of his initiative, he was able to restore voting rights to over 4.5 million Floridians. And so those are amazing stories. There's just two of many in the book, but it really just goes to show how important that ability to petition the government is and how that's being taken away and chopped away at, especially in states like Oklahoma. We're a very red state, but because of the ballot initiative, we've been able to pass some pretty progressive measures, such as medical marijuana, criminal justice reform, Medicaid expansion, which as a result, over 260,000 Oklahomans now have health insurance. That would have never have happened in our Republican-controlled trifecta. And so we want to protect that process. Also on the ballot for 2026 is raising our minimum wage from $7.25 to $15, all made possible because of the citizen-led ballot initiative. And so it's also a passion of mine to protect that right for people to petition their own government.
And it's sorely needed in our home state of Wisconsin as well, by the way, where Governor Evers has recently called for this yet again. But as of now and for the foreseeable future, we'll see when we can fix it. Wisconsin is not one of the states where we can actually make this happen. But
yeah.
we'll talk about that later.
Unfortunately, yeah. I just want to shift gears a little bit. And while you're here, Mickey, I want to talk a little bit about the 2024 election results in which you and some of our other openly non-religious candidates performed well.
Our legislative arm, the FFRF Action Fund, endorsed a total of 51 candidates at the federal and state level. Let's take a quick look at those results. Overall, 36 of the Action Fund's endorsed candidates won and 15 lost. At the U.S. House, 4 out of 9 endorsed candidates won. And in the Senate, 7 of our 8 endorsed candidates won. So overall, that's pretty good news. That's a pretty good record. And if you want more information about those candidates, you can scan that QR code on your screen, or you can click the link in the description.
As for how openly non-religious candidates performed, we have some data from our friends at the Center for Free Thought Equality and the Friendly Atheist. In the U.S. House, 21 candidates using a non-religious label won their election and 8 lost. And for state legislatures, that includes state Senate and state House seats, 79, what we call nuns, won their election and 84 lost. Again, you can go ahead and scan that QR code or click the link in the YouTube description to see all the non-religious candidates.
And finally, let's take a quick look at how different religious and non-religious groups voted in this past election. White, evangelical, or born-again Christians, again, voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. That group makes up only 22% of the voting body, or maybe that's an alarmingly large amount. But all other voters combined voted 57% in favor of Harris. And then let's take a closer breakdown of how different religious groups voted. Jewish people, nuns, and others all voted mostly for Harris, where other religious groups voted overall mostly for Trump. Mickey, do you have thoughts? I mean, it's for a while we used to say that being an atheist was basically political suicide, right? Where it's like it made you unelectable. Do you have thoughts on how these demographics are changing, or any other thoughts about lessons we maybe could learn from this past election?
Even in a state like Oklahoma, constituents care more about how hard you're going to work for them and their families at the Capitol, as opposed to what you do on Sunday mornings. When we were knocking doors, we heard time and time again, yeah, I'm a Christian, I'm religious. However, I don't want government teaching my kids about religion in public school. I want my pastor to do that. I want to have control of that. I don't like the King James Version of the Bible, et cetera, et cetera. people want that separation. And for people who are candidates or incumbents out there, just know that constituents care more about how hard you're going to work for them and protect the U.S. Constitution and your state's Constitution as opposed to what you're doing on Sunday mornings.
And if that is the case in Oklahoma, I think it's pretty safe to say that is the case anywhere in this country. All right, well, I think it is time to go to audience questions, and we have several for you, Mickey. The first one from Grayson asks, in what way or ways does Oklahoma need help in the state church separation fight from those outside the state? So what can people who care about the things we're talking about but are not in Oklahoma, what can they do to help?
Oh, good question. So if you have any affiliation with organizations or nonprofits that can help our local faith leaders, like Oklahoma Faith Network, with donations, would be very, very much needed. To like I said, it cannot be overstated how important it is for faith leaders in Oklahoma and Texas who defend that constitutional principle of separation between church and state are vocal and get the backs of those lawmakers, especially on the Republican side, to give them basically the assurance that they can be Christian and be against Christian nationality or Christian nationalism, because they are in no way the same. One is a religion, the other one is a political ideology.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, for example, the group Christians Against Christian Nationalism. We've been working with them for several years now. And, you know, as much as I think a lot of people who've been in the state church world for a while now have come to see that the non-religious are largely the ones carrying the banner of secularism, keeping religion out of the government, it's so important to remind people that that's not the way it's always been. That's not how it was designed. State-church separation is good for religious liberty for everybody, not just the non-religious. So there's every reason for us to be partnering with our faith allies. And that, again, was one of the things when you were talking about that caught our attention, where it's like, you are absolutely speaking our language.
I will add to that one more, Ryan, is how can people from out of state help states like Oklahoma? Join Freedom from Religion Foundation. Your membership dues help with their law team, their legal team, come into states like Oklahoma and fight unconstitutional bills. And they win because it's so simple. In our state's constitution, you have Article 2, Section 5, which clearly states that no public money shall be used for religious purposes. However, you need a team of attorneys to come in and make that case. And Freedom from Religion Foundation's brilliant staff of attorneys has successfully done that time and time again, but it's not free. So it does make a big difference to keep them funded and to continue to build up their staff, because we're seeing a wave of unconstitutional theocratic legislation being filed in states like Oklahoma as we speak.
That's absolutely right. And unfortunately, we are, outgunned in terms of funding when we have a small but mighty team versus groups, that like the Alliance Defending Freedom and others have just this incredible amount of financial backing. And that's who we are up against both in court and also in state legislatures fighting these policy battles. So absolutely, any support that people can provide, we sure can use it.
Great question.
Yeah, another question. This comes from Phil Monroe. So Phil asks, do you have any thoughts about legislators who tweak the will of the people against what the people pass on petitions? So for example, Phil mentions restrictions on abortion in Missouri. So, legislators vote against what people have expressed that they want through petitions. What do you think about legislators who are not respecting the will of their constituents?
Yeah, controlling politicians love to tell people what to do. They hate it when the constituents tell them what to do. And that's exactly what citizen-led ballot initiatives do. So it's no surprise that they're trying to dismantle it every chance they can get. I did mention Desmond Meade earlier. I said he was successful in restoring Floridians' rights to vote who had prior felony convictions. However, one of the parts I did not mention is after that passed, the Florida Republican-controlled legislature put a a caveat that said that if one of those people who had a prior felony conviction owed any money to the courts, then they could not vote until every penny was paid off. And that prevented a lot of people who had paid their debt to society by serving time in the Florida penitentiary. It kept them from voting. Thankfully, that was such a high-profile issue that celebrities and athletes and people of affluence from all over, including nonprofit groups, pulled together money to give to forgive that debt on behalf of those Floridians. But that's just one example of many, many, many of legislators who try to usurp the will of the people by implementing their little caveats to contain that and to continue their own control. We've seen that in Oklahoma when it comes to medical marijuana. State question, I think it was 780 back in 2018, passed overwhelmingly. But we've seen, controlling politicians putting amendments on that to make it against the will of the people. And that's the most important thing, is that when these ballot initiatives are passed, it has to uphold the spirit of the people. And that requires lawmakers who are informed and who are willing to speak out against those politicians who try to usurp that will of the people.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that's one of the most frustrating things for me, and certainly that I've seen. I can point to an example of the voucher movement that's passing, or we'll pick out Texas right now, right? Vouchers have been publicly just like wildly unpopular in Texas. Governor Abbott promised to primary all the Republican opponents who spoke out in opposition of vouchers. So he's just using brute strength to kind of legislate against what the people's will is. So just to your point, that's extremely frustrating on a lot of levels. So.
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned a great point. They weaponize money in politics time and time again. One of the best things that we could do to restore faith in government is to get money out of politics. Publicly funded campaigns may be an option that other states and communities have done that have had success. But whenever Citizens United passed in 2011, that really, really damaged the integrity of our government institutions, of DC, of unlimited funds, dark money being funneled into all of this. It just, especially in states like Texas, where you have two oil billionaires who are buying the state house. If you're unfamiliar, check out Representative James Tallarico's Instagram or any of his social media sites, YouTube, and he explains it very, very well. But money in politics is corrupting government. It's buying out moderate Republicans, and it's coercing legislators into going along with ideals that they're not comfortable with, based off the fact that if they don't, they will be primaried by these extremely affluent people like the oil moguls in Texas. And their opponents, who are religious extremists, will be fully funded to the point where they have no chance. So we have to do something about money in politics, but that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, well, and it comes back to the topic we were talking about before with, the importance of direct democracy, right? Like if there is a remedy to this issue of a small minority grabbing control and refusing to give it back, that remedy has got to be a well-informed and active voting populace operating within a functional democracy. And so any work that we can do to make that closer to reality is going to be the only way to help change this sort of system.
Well said.
All right. Well, we have one more audience question for you. Someone picked up on your discussion about blasphemy laws earlier, and you and I have talked about how I've spoken on this show earlier about how these are kind of like zombie laws, right? So we're kind of going in and trying to slay these undead laws that are at least debatably not enforceable right now. But we've learned from recent history that they can spring to life. We saw that in Wisconsin with our Civil War era abortion restriction, when after the Dobbs decision, all of a sudden this became law again. And that absolutely could happen with blasphemy laws. So this viewer wants to know any further thoughts you have, Mickey, on how do we go about actually doing that when we have these old laws in the books that maybe it's hard to get the ball rolling because, like you said, people say, well, this isn't enforceable anyway. How can this possibly be the top priority? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we're looking at Massachusetts, Michigan, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Wyoming, who still have these antiquated blasphemy laws on the books. And the strategy there is to build relationships and partnerships with lawmakers in those states to bring this issue to awareness and to hopefully anticipate that this could be an issue, talking to them about possibly bringing up legislation to repeal these outdated laws and then taking it from there.
Awesome. Well, Mickey, that is all the time we have. Welcome to the team. We are looking forward to the great work that we know you're going to do here. And that wraps up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. A new episode of our broadcast TV show Free Thought Matters airs this weekend. FFRF co-presidents Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker will speak with Amanda Jones, a Louisiana librarian who was severely harassed for fighting against book bans in her community.
I just went to speak as a resident of my community. I woke up 4 days later after giving that speech, which was just a speech against censorship. That same thing 30 other people said at the meeting. And I woke up to a targeted smear campaign set to ruin my reputation in my community. They created a meme that said I advocate teaching sexual acts to children and that I give pornography. I want to give pornography and erotica to 6-year-olds. None of which I said in my speech, completely made up.
You'll be able to watch that episode on TV stations around the country this weekend, and soon on the FFRF YouTube channel as well.
And don't miss our weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio. This week, Dan and Annie Laurie will speak with former religious leader Carolyn Shadle about her book, From Religion to Reason, My Journey. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to check out the latest episode of We Dissent, the only podcast hosted by exclusively women constitutional lawyers discussing separation of church and state. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out online at we-dissent.org.
And finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you so much. If not, please join us. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.